Imagine building your life from the ground up, only to have everything ripped away in the blink of an eye by the person you trusted most. Claire's story isn't just about a broken marriage. It's about betrayal, resilience, and the unexpected power of reclaiming your life. After 12 years of marriage, her husband left her for a younger woman, drained their joint account, and thought he could walk away without consequences. But what happens when the woman you thought you knew turns out to be a stranger? When life throws you the ultimate betrayal, do you crumble or do you rise up stronger than ever before? Claire chose to rise. What started as heartbreak transformed into the building blocks of an empire. She turned her pain into power, and today, her boutique chain is a symbol of strength, independence, and success. Mark thought he had won, but Claire proved that the best revenge isn't about anger or retaliation. It's about showing the world your worth, standing tall, and succeeding when everyone expects you to fail. This is the story of how one woman turned betrayal into triumph, and how you can do the same. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more empowering stories like this. You don't want to miss what comes next. The divorce text message and emptying the joint account. At 38, Claire had built a life she thought was secure, wrapped in the warm comfort of routine, the kind of life many people envied. 12 years of marriage, a thriving boutique that she had poured her heart and soul into, a home that once felt like a safe haven. She had it all. Or so she thought. Then, on an ordinary Thursday, her world was shattered in an instant. The text arrived while she was helping customers at her boutique, a seemingly insignificant moment that would turn out to be anything but ordinary. The message from Mark was cold, cruel, and final. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account. Haha. As she read those words, a wave of disbelief hit her like a freight train. This couldn't be real, not after everything they had built together. For a moment, she felt the world shift beneath her feet, but not in the way she expected. There was no dramatic outburst, no tears flooding her eyes. Instead, Claire's hands didn't shake as she wrapped Mrs. Peterson's scarf. Her voice remained steady, and the only sign that her 12-year marriage had just ended in the most callous way possible was a slight tightening around her eyes. She felt something, but it wasn't panic or hysteria. It was a strange, calculated calm, as if the shock had already settled into a cold, hard reality. As Mrs. Peterson left, Claire locked up the boutique for the day, the weight of the message settling into her bones. Her husband, the man she had trusted with everything, had just casually demolished their life together. Yet, despite the devastation she should have been feeling, Claire moved with quiet precision. She wasn't the woman who would crumble under betrayal. She would make sure of that. She wasn't going to beg, to plead, to act like the victim of her husband's petty cruelty. She had always known that life had a way of throwing curveballs, but she had never imagined this one. And now that it had come, she wasn't about to let it take her down. The signs had been there for months. The late nights at work that never seemed to match his pay stubs, the password changes on his phone when he had never been secretive before, the way he started obsessively going to the gym and buying new clothes, trying desperately to recapture his youth. Claire had noticed it all, but had pushed it to the back of her mind. She'd convinced herself that he was just going through a midlife crisis, that he would snap out of it. But now it all made sense. She'd found a receipt for a dinner for two at an expensive restaurant on a night he had claimed to be working late. That was the final straw. When he had mentioned a week later wanting to combine their accounts to simplify things, Claire had agreed with a smile. But in reality, she had already opened a separate bank account at a different bank. She moved her personal savings there, just enough to keep him from becoming suspicious. The joint account, the one Mark had now drained, was kept just full enough to match the regular deposits he was accustomed to. The rest of her money was tucked away safely, and she had kept meticulous records of every suspicious transaction he had made over the past year. She had been prepared for this moment long before it arrived. When the next text came, "Don't bother begging. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later." Claire didn't flinch. Melissa, the new receptionist at his office, was the girl Claire had met at the company Christmas party. Claire had noticed how she laughed too loudly at Mark's jokes and how she touched his arm when she thought no one was looking. She was young, naive, and apparently the perfect pawn for Mark's selfish escape from reality. But Claire wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Instead, she called her lawyer. She had consulted with him 2 months ago when she had found the hotel charges on their credit card statement. It was time, she said simply. Mark had just made his move. The papers are ready, the lawyer replied. I'll file them first thing tomorrow. Do you want me to have him served in Miami? Claire took a deep breath, letting the calmness of the moment wash over her. No rush, she responded. Let him think he's won first. Mark's next message came through, more condescending than the last. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger, after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. Claire smiled to herself. Little shop, he called it. The boutique she had built from the ground up, the one that generated more income than his middle management job, the one that had given her independence and purpose. Mark had underestimated her once again, and it would be his undoing. She spent the evening at home, her home, the one she had inherited from her grandmother, the one she had kept in her name despite Mark's repeated suggestions to add him to the deed. Another lucky instinct that had paid off. As she organized the paperwork her lawyer would need, Claire found their wedding album. Mark looked so different back then, before his midlife crisis had turned him into a caricature of his former self. The man she had married was gone, replaced by someone who was too busy trying to prove he was still young and desirable. It made her sick to think of him, but as she flipped through the pages, a sense of clarity settled in. She wasn't the one who had changed. He had. And now it was time for her to step into a future he couldn't touch. The life she had built was hers, and no one, especially not Mark, was going to take it from her. That night, Claire allowed herself a small smile as she raised a glass of wine. The good stuff, the bottle she had been saving for a special occasion. Tomorrow, she would start taking the necessary steps to protect herself, her business, and her future. But tonight, she would savor the quiet, knowing that while Mark thought he had the upper hand, he had no idea what was coming. The signs of change, the signs you can't ignore. For months, Claire had sensed something off. It was subtle at first, a slight change in the rhythm of their lives together, a shift that was easy to ignore or chalk up to the everyday stresses of marriage. Mark, her husband of 12 years, had always been the dependable, steady type. But lately, something had changed, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. The late nights at work had become more frequent, always with an excuse that seemed to stretch a little too far, a little too thin. Then came the changes to his phone. New passwords, sudden lock screen notifications, and the unsettling way he would quickly grab his phone and step out of the room when she walked in. It wasn't like him. Mark was always open, always a man of transparency. But now, every action felt calculated. Every glance at his phone, every text he sent when he thought she wasn't looking, seemed to carry a weight she couldn't ignore. His obsession with his appearance had also grown. Mark, who used to pride himself on comfort over style, was now spending hours at the gym, lifting weights, working on his body like it was the most important thing in the world. The tight shirts and new wardrobe didn't fit with the man she had known, the man she had married. She noticed him changing, but there was a strange part of her that didn't want to acknowledge it. Denial was a powerful force, and Claire had relied on it for so long. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. One evening, as she tidied up the living room after a quiet dinner, Claire found it, a dinner receipt from an upscale restaurant. The date matched a night Mark had claimed to be working late at the office. It wasn't just the expensive meal that caught her attention. It was the second set of silverware, the 2 glasses of wine, the fact that it had clearly been a date. Her heart sank. The receipt felt like a dagger to her chest, a confirmation of what she had feared. For the first time in months, Claire realized the man she thought she knew wasn't who he was anymore. Her hands trembled as she set the receipt down, staring at the paper in disbelief. The faint smell of betrayal hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She could feel it. It was real. That night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events in her mind. The signs were there, undeniable and clear now that she was no longer ignoring them. Mark's behavior, the secrets, the distance between them, they had all been leading to this moment. This was no accident. This was deliberate. The cracks in their marriage had been appearing for months, and now they were impossible to hide. The anger surged in her chest, but along with it came a deep sense of calm. Claire wasn't going to let this tear her apart. She wasn't going to crumble into despair. She had built herself up, had worked hard to create a life she was proud of, and she wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Mark, take it away from her. The next morning, while Mark was in the shower, Claire took a step that she knew would change everything. She opened a new bank account in her name only, at a different bank. She knew this was coming, had known it for weeks, but the finality of it hit her as she signed the papers. It felt like taking control of her future, a future that no longer included the man who had promised to be by her side through everything. She transferred her personal savings into the new account, making sure the balance remained just enough in their joint account to keep Mark from getting suspicious. It was a careful, calculated move, and as she clicked the transfer button, a sense of peace washed over her. She wasn't reacting out of panic or desperation. She was preparing for what was inevitable. A few days later, Mark suggested that they combine their bank accounts. He'd always wanted to simplify things, to make everything shared. Claire, ever the optimist, agreed with a smile, but inside, she was already several steps ahead of him. She played along, acting as if nothing had changed, while in reality, she had already protected herself. She had already made sure that whatever Mark had planned, whatever mess he thought he could create, she was prepared. She had her own backup plan, a safety net that would keep her grounded, no matter what came next. As she sat at the kitchen table, smiling up at Mark as he spoke about simplifying their finances, Claire knew she was in control. Mark might think he had all the power, that his actions were beyond her reach, but Claire had been watching, waiting. She had learned, through months of suspicion and observation, that the best way to survive betrayal was not through emotional outbursts, but through careful, deliberate action. And now, with her new account safely secured, Claire was ready for whatever came next. She wasn't going to let Mark's lies, his deceit, or his selfish actions destroy her. This was only the beginning, and she had no intention of losing the fight. The game had shifted, and Claire was no longer playing the part of the oblivious wife. She was a woman in control of her future, a woman who had learned to protect what was hers. Mark might have thought he could walk away with everything, but Claire had already begun her own journey, one where she was the victor, not the victim. And she would make sure he learned that the hard way. Self-protection and preparation, preparing for the legal battle. Claire wasn't about to let Mark take away what she had built, not without a fight. As the days went by, his cold messages continued to flood her phone, each one more condescending than the last. Yet, despite the venomous tone, Claire remained silent. She didn't respond. She didn't beg. Instead, she focused. She had seen the signs, understood the games he was playing, and now she was prepared. She had already gathered every piece of evidence she needed. Bank statements, receipts, screenshots of text messages, and a detailed record of every suspicious financial transaction he had made over the past year. She had watched him slip further away, all while documenting his every move, anticipating the betrayal that was coming. Claire was no longer the naive wife she had once been. She was not going to sit idly by, crying and waiting for the pieces of her life to be ripped apart. She had already taken control of the situation, knowing that her next steps would define the future. The business she had built, the home she had cherished, and the independence she had fought for, none of it was going to be dismantled by the whims of a man who thought he could walk away without consequences. Mark might have believed he could start fresh with a young girlfriend and a new life in Miami, but Claire was not going to let him take a single thing from her. She didn't respond to his messages, not with anger or tears, but with silence. Her phone buzzed constantly with his increasingly desperate pleas for a response, his words laced with insults and manipulation. "You'll regret this," he wrote. "You'll see that you're nothing without me." But Claire knew better than to let his words get under her skin. She wasn't angry. She was focused, determined, and already several steps ahead of him. The silence was her power, her way of saying that she no longer needed to explain herself to him. Instead of confronting him directly, Claire did what she knew she needed to do. She picked up the phone and called her lawyer. "It's time," she said, her voice steady, calm, despite the storm brewing inside her. "He just made his move. I want to start the paperwork." The lawyer's voice was reassuring, confident. "We've been preparing for this, Claire. I'll have the documents ready for you." And just like that, with the push of a button, Claire set the wheels of justice in motion. The legal battle had begun, and this time, Mark wouldn't be the one calling the shots. As Claire sat at her desk, preparing the legal documents, her hands steady as she went through the motions, she couldn't help but glance at the wedding album sitting on the shelf nearby. It had been months since she'd opened it, years even, but something about today made her reach for it. As she flipped through the pages, the memories hit her like a tidal wave. The day they met, the wedding day, the smiles, the promises. It seemed so long ago. The life they had shared, a life that felt real at the time. But now, as she stared at the photographs, she couldn't help but see the cracks in the images. Mark had changed in ways that had once been so subtle, so gradual that she hadn't even noticed until it was too late. He had transformed before her eyes into someone she no longer recognized, someone who had abandoned everything they had built for the empty promises of a younger woman. The man she had once known, the man who had held her hand as they navigated life together, was gone, replaced by a stranger, a man who now looked at her with cold detachment, unable to see the woman who had stood by his side through thick and thin. He had been consumed by his own insecurities, trying to recapture his youth in ways that only pushed him further away from her. She could see it now, the years of silent resentment, the ways he had shut her out, the times he'd rather work late or hit the gym than spend time with her. It was all part of a larger picture she had failed to see at first. But now, as the pieces came together, it became clear that Mark had been planning his escape long before the text message. And in that moment, staring at the photos of their younger selves, Claire realized just how much she had changed too. She had been the woman who stayed home, who supported him, who believed in their future. But now, looking at the reflection of the woman she had become, she knew she was no longer that person. The person she had become was stronger, more resilient, and more capable than she ever thought possible. She had fought for her business, her independence, and now she was fighting for her dignity. Claire closed the album and placed it gently back on the shelf. As she did, she realized that the woman in those pictures was gone. But the woman she had become, the woman who was no longer afraid to stand up for herself, to protect what she had built, was the one in control now. Mark's betrayal had changed her, but it hadn't broken her. It had only made her stronger. And with every step she took toward her future, she knew she was leaving the past behind. The battle wasn't over, but Claire was ready. The silence, the calm, it was all part of the plan. She wasn't going to let Mark win. Not this time. This time, she was the one who would come out on top. She was ready to fight for everything that mattered, for everything she had built, and nothing, not even Mark's betrayal, was going to take that from her. The shocks and actions, the shocks and acts of revenge. Mark's texts didn't stop coming. Each one was more condescending than the last, as if he reveled in his power, his ability to twist the knife. "I've been planning this for months. Melissa understands me in ways you never could," he wrote one morning, the words like poison dripping into Claire's inbox. She could almost hear the smug tone in his text. His attempt to belittle her, to make her feel as though she had been nothing more than a stepping stone to something better, someone younger, someone more like his vision of himself. These words, these taunts, were meant to wound her, to push her into a corner, to make her grovel for a piece of the life they once shared. But Claire wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. She didn't respond, not with anger, not with tears. Instead, she stared at the screen, letting his words settle, not with the ache of betrayal, but with a sense of cold, calculated resolve. Mark thought he had her figured out, thought he knew how she would react. Devastated, broken, begging him to come back. But Claire had already passed that stage. She had long ago stopped relying on him for her happiness, for her sense of self-worth. He was nothing but a reminder of the life she was leaving behind, and the woman she had become was no longer afraid to let go. The silence between them spoke volumes. Claire wasn't wasting her energy on his manipulations. She had bigger plans in motion. As the texts continued to come, she methodically set her next steps into motion. She wasn't going to let Mark get away with what he had done. He had made a move, but Claire was about to make hers. And she was going to do it with precision, with legal documentation, and with the calm strength she had cultivated over the last few weeks. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Mark. I know this must be hard for you, but don't worry. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. It must mean a lot to you. The mocking tone was unmistakable, and Claire could almost feel his satisfaction, his belief that she would crumble under the weight of his words. But she wasn't going to respond to his cruelty. Not now, not ever. Instead, she dialed the number for the credit card company, her fingers steady as she waited for the representative to answer. Mrs. Harrison. The voice on the other end greeted her politely. How can I assist you today? I need to report fraudulent charges, Claire said, her voice calm, unwavering. There are 2 first-class tickets to Miami that were booked using my joint account without my permission. The charges were made yesterday. She could practically hear the representative's fingers tapping away at the keyboard. Of course, ma'am. I'll take care of that right away. Is there anything else I can help you with? Yes, Claire replied smoothly, not missing a beat. I'd like to cancel the hotel reservation that was booked under the same name. And I need to remove my husband as an authorized user on the account. Absolutely, the representative confirmed, a slight edge of satisfaction in her voice. I'll handle that immediately. You'll receive a confirmation email once everything has been processed. Claire smiled as she ended the call, the satisfaction of taking back control surging through her. Mark thought he had won. He thought he had taken everything from her. Her trust, her stability, her peace of mind. But in that moment, Claire knew he hadn't taken anything that truly mattered. He had only managed to dig his own grave, and she was the one who would stand tall when it all came crashing down. She couldn't help but imagine Mark and Melissa arriving at the airport in Miami, excited for their getaway, only to have their tickets invalidated and their hotel reservation canceled. The thought of them standing there, confused and frustrated, gave Claire a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had taken the money, the assets, the life they had shared, but Claire was taking something far more important, her power. She had no need to chase after him, to beg him to return or apologize. She had learned to let go of what she couldn't control, and now she was simply waiting for the inevitable consequences of his actions to unfold. As the days passed, Mark's messages grew more desperate, his attempts to manipulate her more transparent. You're ruining everything, he wrote. You'll regret this. You'll see what you've lost when it's too late. But Claire didn't need to waste her breath on him. She wasn't the one who had lost anything. Mark had lost everything, his dignity, his respect, his integrity. She could almost hear the cracks in his voice now, the realization sinking in that his grand escape wasn't going to be so grand after all. That night, Claire couldn't help but smile to herself as she sat in her living room, the peaceful silence of her home surrounding her. She had played her cards right. Mark had underestimated her, and now he would pay the price. She wasn't a victim, not anymore. She was the woman who had taken her life back, step by careful step, without ever losing herself along the way. And as she thought about the inevitable fallout Mark would face, she knew that nothing could ever break her again. She was free. The quiet triumph that filled her chest wasn't one of revenge, but of quiet strength. Claire had learned that sometimes the best revenge wasn't about fighting back with fury, but about calmly taking control of your life, one strategic move at a time. And as she drifted off to sleep that night, she knew Mark's consequences were already set in motion. He had made his move, but Claire was the one who would come out on top. The legal battle, the courtroom battle. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Claire stood tall, her lawyer by her side, prepared for the battle that would determine the fate of everything she had worked so hard to build. The courthouse was quiet, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of what was to come. As they entered the courtroom, Claire could feel the tension in the air. This was it, the moment where everything she had meticulously planned and worked for would come to fruition. Mark arrived not long after, his appearance a stark contrast to the man she had once known. He was dressed in clothes that were clearly meant to impress, too tight and too youthful for a man in his mid-40s. His designer jeans, his tight blazer, his attempt to look like someone he wasn't, it all screamed desperation. As he walked into the courtroom, Claire saw the unease in his eyes. For all his bravado, for all the smugness he had displayed in his text messages, it was clear he was starting to realize that things were not going to go the way he had imagined. He looked nervous, out of place, like a man who had overestimated his power and was now feeling the full weight of his actions. Claire remained calm, her gaze steady. She had no time for nerves or second thoughts. The man who had once been her partner, her confidant, was now nothing more than a stranger sitting across from her, a man whose lies and deceit had finally caught up with him. And she was ready to face him in this final showdown, knowing that the truth was on her side. The hearing began, and Claire's lawyer wasted no time. He presented the evidence in a way that left little room for doubt. Mark's financial fraud was laid bare for all to see. The drained joint account, the large sums of money that had been withdrawn without her knowledge, and the evidence that Mark had used their credit card to fund his lavish trip with his young girlfriend, Melissa. The receipts, the bank statements, the text messages, they were all there, proof of the betrayal that had shattered Claire's world. As the lawyer presented each piece of evidence, Claire couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of vindication. This was what she had been preparing for. This was what Mark had underestimated, the fact that she had been watching, waiting, and preparing for this moment. The cold, calculated calm with which she had responded to his actions had led her to this place, and now the truth would come to light. Mark had assumed that he could pull the wool over her eyes, that he could walk away without consequences, but Claire was about to prove him wrong. Despite the mounting evidence, Mark attempted to argue his case. His voice was shaky as he tried to deflect the blame, insisting that the money had been spent on necessary expenses, and that he had simply made a mistake in how he had handled the joint account. His lawyer, equally desperate, tried to spin a story about Claire being controlling and vindictive, claiming that she had pushed him to this point, that he had no choice but to seek freedom. But Claire wasn't fooled by the weak excuses. She had seen through his lies long before this moment. Mark's actions spoke louder than his words, and the court could see that as well. The judge listened intently, reviewing the evidence with a stern expression. It was clear that the court saw Mark's behavior for what it was, a deliberate attempt to take advantage of Claire's trust, to betray her and steal from her in the process. The evidence of fraud was irrefutable, and Mark's attempts to justify his actions fell flat. His demeanor shifted from arrogant to defensive as the judge addressed him directly. "Mr. Harrison," the judge said, her voice calm but firm, "you have admitted to draining a joint account without your spouse's knowledge. You have also used the shared credit card for personal expenses without consent. Your actions have been clearly documented, and they represent not just a betrayal of trust, but a violation of financial responsibility. Do you deny this?" Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face reddening as he stammered. I didn't mean to," his words trailed off, weak and ineffective. The judge raised an eyebrow. "So you admit to the fraudulent charges?" Mark's lawyer tried to intervene, but the judge cut him off. "Mr. Harrison, the evidence is clear. Your actions were deliberate, premeditated, and they have caused significant harm. The court finds sufficient grounds to freeze all joint assets pending the final resolution of this case. Any funds removed from the joint account must be returned immediately." The words hit Mark like a physical blow. Claire could see the color drain from his face as he realized the gravity of what was happening. His entire plan, to take the money, run off with his girlfriend, and start fresh without consequence, was crumbling before his eyes. The court was not on his side. His lies, his manipulations, his arrogance had all led him to this moment, and there was no escape. As the judge continued to lay down the rulings, Claire felt a sense of quiet triumph. This was the moment she had worked for, the moment when the truth had finally come to light. Mark had tried to destroy her, to take everything she had built, but now it was clear that his actions had not gone unnoticed. He was the one who would pay the price. The hearing ended with Mark's assets frozen and his financial misconduct officially recognized. As Claire stood to leave the courtroom, she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. The man who had thought he could break her was now facing the consequences of his own actions. And she, the woman he had underestimated, was the one who had come out on top. As she walked out of the courthouse, Claire didn't feel anger. She didn't feel vindictive. What she felt was something far stronger, peace. She had faced Mark, looked him in the eye, and shown him that she was not someone to be trampled on. The battle wasn't over, but Claire had won the first round, and she was ready for whatever came next. Consequences and recovery, when he lost everything. Mark had thought he could walk away with everything. He had believed that his betrayal, his selfishness, and his decision to leave Claire would lead him to a new life. A life filled with freedom and excitement, away from the mundane responsibilities he had always complained about. But now, in the aftermath of his actions, Mark was starting to see the truth. He had lost everything. His marriage, his reputation, his sense of dignity, it was all slipping away. He had pushed Claire too far, betrayed her trust, and now he was paying the price. The reality of his situation settled in like a weight on his chest. Mark's life had become a series of desperate attempts to fill the void he had created. He turned to online gambling, tried to salvage his finances with get-rich-quick schemes, but nothing worked. His money was gone. His new life with Melissa, the young receptionist who had once seemed like the answer to all his problems, was unraveling just as quickly. The dream of escaping his responsibilities, of starting fresh, had turned into a nightmare. And with each failed attempt to regain control, the despair began to take hold. Mark found himself in a small, cramped apartment, living off what little he could scrape together. Gone were the expensive dinners, the lavish trips, and the false sense of security that had once come with his middle management position. Now he was living in the shadow of his own choices, with no one to blame but himself. Meanwhile, Claire was thriving. The devastation she had felt in the early days of her divorce had transformed into a quiet, determined strength. She had made the decision not to let Mark's actions define her, not to let his betrayal break her spirit. Instead, she poured everything she had into her boutique, building it into a success that surpassed even her own expectations. Her confidence grew with each passing day, and as her business flourished, so did she. Claire was no longer the woman who had been dependent on Mark, the woman who had believed in their shared dreams. She was her own woman now, powerful and independent, a force to be reckoned with. It was clear to Claire that her future was in her own hands. The first location of her boutique had been a success, but she wasn't content with just that. She had bigger plans, and she knew that now was the time to execute them. Opening a second location for her boutique was not just a business decision, it was a statement. It was her way of showing the world that she was unstoppable, that no one, not even Mark, could take away the life she had worked so hard to build. The new location was a success almost immediately. Claire's vision, her commitment to quality, and her unique sense of style had created a loyal customer base that continued to grow. She worked tirelessly, not just managing the business, but connecting with her customers, learning their needs, and creating an experience that kept them coming back. Her boutique wasn't just a store. It was a reflection of her journey, a testament to her resilience and her ability to turn pain into progress. As the business expanded, so did Claire's network of support. Old friends who had watched her go through the hardest years of her life began to reach out, offering words of encouragement and admiration. They saw the strength in her, the way she had turned her life around, and they were proud to be part of her journey. But it wasn't just friends who stood by her. Her loyal customers, many of whom were women who had been through their own struggles, began to show up more frequently. They came not just for the clothes, but for Claire herself. They came because they saw in her a reflection of their own strength, their own determination. Some of them had faced betrayals of their own. Some had fought battles that no one could understand, and they found solidarity in Claire's story. One afternoon, as Claire was overseeing a new shipment of merchandise, a woman walked into the boutique, her eyes filled with admiration. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said. "I've been coming here for years, but after hearing about your story, I just felt like I needed to tell you how much you've inspired me. You've taught me that it's okay to walk away from toxic people, that it's okay to start over, no matter how old you are or how much you've lost." You've made me realize that I don't have to stay stuck in a situation that doesn't serve me. Claire smiled, her heart swelling with pride. This was what it was all about. It wasn't just about the boutique, or the money, or the success. It was about connecting with people, empowering them, and showing them that they, too, could overcome whatever they were facing. As she listened to the woman, Claire realized that this was the true reward of her hard work. She had become more than just a businesswoman. She had become a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for others who were struggling to find their way. With each new success, Claire grew even stronger. The woman who had once been devastated by Mark's betrayal was now a force of nature, unapologetically forging her path and showing the world that she was capable of achieving anything she set her mind to. She was more than just a survivor. She was a conqueror. The more Mark failed, the more Claire thrived. And with every success, every milestone reached, Claire knew that she was moving further away from the pain of her past and closer to the future she had always deserved. The boutique, her empire, was a reflection of that future, one where she was in control, one where she had built something lasting, something meaningful, and something entirely her own. And as she looked ahead, with her second location thriving and her reputation growing, Claire knew one thing for certain. Mark's failures were not her concern anymore. She had built her life from the ground up, and nothing, not his lies, not his selfishness, could take that away from her. The harsh reality for Mark faces the consequences. After the divorce, Mark's life unraveled in ways he could never have anticipated. The confident, self-assured man he once believed himself to be had faded into a shell of his former self. He had thought that his new life, free of responsibility, unburdened by a wife who had become too controlling in his eyes, would be full of promise. He imagined himself dating younger women, finding excitement in their company, and proving to himself that he still had value. So he turned to dating apps, swiping left and right, hopeful that someone would be willing to take a chance on him. But reality quickly caught up with Mark. The younger women he was so eager to attract weren't impressed by his charm, his money, or his supposed wit. They'd heard the whispers about him, about his failed marriage, about the way he had used Claire, about the debts he had racked up and the lies he had told. The stories followed him like a shadow, and no amount of fancy words or well-crafted profiles could mask the truth. Rejection became his constant companion, and with every failed match, Mark's confidence shattered just a little bit more. As his attempts to find a new partner floundered, Mark's financial situation grew increasingly dire. Gone were the days when he could rely on the joint account to cover his lavish lifestyle. He had drained their shared funds, only to realize too late that money was no longer easy to come by. The middle management position he had once held with pride no longer seemed as secure. His company downsized, leaving him with a demotion, and the comfortable lifestyle he had enjoyed with Claire was now nothing more than a distant memory. With bills piling up and creditors knocking at his door, Mark turned to desperate measures. He began to gamble, throwing what little money he had into online casinos, and betting on whatever he thought might offer a quick fix. Every day was an attempt to outsmart the system, to win back what he had lost, but the losses kept mounting. He joined every get-rich-quick scheme that promised financial freedom, each one more absurd than the last. He signed up for pyramid schemes, invested in fake startups, and borrowed money from anyone who would lend it to him. The reality he had built for himself, a life of shortcuts, lies, and deceit, was now crashing down around him, and Mark was powerless to stop it. Meanwhile, Claire's life was a stark contrast to Mark's descent. From the moment she had made the decision to leave him, Claire had found herself walking a path that, although painful, had ultimately led to strength. She knew she had made the right choice by leaving him. She had watched as he spiraled further into debt, struggling to maintain the image of a man in control, while she, on the other hand, had rebuilt her life piece by piece. With every step she took towards her independence, she felt the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. Claire's business continued to thrive, expanding in ways she had never imagined. She took control of her finances, her career, and her life. The boutique she had worked so tirelessly to build was now a symbol of her resilience, her ability to rise above the turmoil Mark had left in his wake. She had made her decision, And as she watched Mark sink deeper into his own mess, she knew without a doubt that she had done the right thing. She had not allowed herself to be another casualty of his selfishness, his manipulations. She had chosen herself, and that choice had made all the difference. Mark's failures were not her concern anymore. She had learned to let go of the bitterness that had once threatened to consume her. She had come to understand that his inability to take responsibility for his actions wasn't her burden to carry. The more she watched him flounder, the more she realized that his downfall wasn't a reflection of her choices. It was the consequence of his own. He had built his life on lies, on taking from others, and now he was reaping what he had sown. Claire no longer needed to feel sorry for him. His fate was his own to bear. As Mark continued to live with his parents, unable to make ends meet, Claire took comfort in knowing that she had made the right decision. She had not let him drag her down with him. He had expected her to fall apart, to beg him to come back, but she had surprised him and herself by walking away. And in doing so, she had found the strength she had never known she had. Mark, lost in his own mess of poor decisions and failed attempts to fix what he had broken, would never understand the peace Claire had found. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. She had built a life based on integrity, hard work, and independence. She had taken back control, and now, as she stood tall, watching Mark's life crumble, she couldn't help but feel a quiet, profound satisfaction. She had been the one to walk away, but in the end, she was the one who had truly won. Success and independence, success without his help. Claire's rise was nothing short of remarkable. What had once been a simple boutique, a passion project born from determination and hard work, was now a thriving business empire. She had transformed herself from a woman who had been betrayed, broken, and left behind into an icon of strength and independence. Every day, she continued to build on the foundation she had laid, expanding her boutique chain with each new location opening its doors to eager customers. Her vision, her relentless drive, and her unwavering commitment to her own success had paid off in ways that surpassed her wildest dreams. Her empire wasn't just about clothes or accessories. It was about something much more profound. It was about self-reliance, about carving out a space in the world where she was the master of her own destiny. Claire wasn't just selling products. She was selling a mindset, a way of life that embodied strength, resilience, and empowerment. Her boutiques had become a symbol of what it meant to stand on your own, to build something from nothing, and to protect everything you worked for with the kind of tenacity that came from knowing you were worth it. As her influence grew, so did her role as a mentor and inspiration, particularly for young women looking to navigate the often difficult world of business. Claire became a beacon for those who were tired of seeing their dreams dashed by others. She spoke candidly about her journey, about the hard lessons she had learned, and about the importance of protecting one's assets and maintaining independence in a world that often expected women to shrink back or to compromise. She held workshops for young entrepreneurs, teaching them how to safeguard their businesses, how to stand firm in the face of adversity, and how to believe in themselves even when the world seemed stacked against them. Her advice was clear. Success wasn't just about profit. It was about preserving your integrity, knowing your worth, and never allowing anyone, not even those you love, to diminish your value. She knew all too well what it was like to be underestimated, to be made to feel small, and she refused to let any woman in her orbit feel that way. As Claire's story spread, so did her reputation. She became a sought-after speaker, an influencer in the world of business, and a role model for countless women who saw her not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a symbol of what could be achieved when you refused to let life's obstacles define you. Her boutiques, now a chain, stood as a testament to the woman she had become. Unshakable, unapologetic, and fierce in her pursuit of success. But success, as Claire had learned, often came with the unexpected. One afternoon, while overseeing a shipment of new inventory, the door to her flagship boutique opened, and in walked a familiar face. Claire didn't need to look twice to recognize her. It was Melissa, Mark's ex-girlfriend, the woman who had been the catalyst for the end of Claire's marriage. For a moment, time seemed to slow and Claire's pulse quickened, but she didn't react with anger or resentment. Instead, she stood up, composed, calm, and waited as Melissa walked toward her. I need to talk to you, Melissa said, her voice hesitant but sincere. Claire simply nodded, gesturing for her to sit. Melissa took a deep breath, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and vulnerability. I've been meaning to do this for a long time, she began, and I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I need to apologize. I was part of something I didn't fully understand, and after everything that happened, I've realized just how wrong I was. Claire remained silent, watching her intently, her expression softening. There was no bitterness left in her, no animosity that could cloud her judgment. She had moved on from the past. She had built a life of her own, and she wasn't about to let the mistakes of others hold her back anymore. I was caught up in what I thought was something new and exciting, Melissa continued, her voice faltering. I didn't know the full truth about Mark and everything that had happened with you. But after we broke up, I started hearing things. And as much as I didn't want to admit it, I started seeing the man he really was. She paused, looking Claire in the eye. He didn't respect me. He didn't treat me with the same care you did. He made me believe I was special. But in reality, he was just running away from himself, from his own failures. And I see that now. I'm sorry for being part of that. I should have never been with him, especially not at your expense. Claire's heart stirred, but there was no anger, just an overwhelming sense of clarity. Thank you, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Thank you for being honest. You don't owe me an apology, but I appreciate it. And I'm glad you see the truth now. I hope you find someone who respects you, who treats you the way you deserve to be treated. Melissa nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I have, she whispered. I've met someone who actually listens to me, who values me for who I am. And I'm so sorry for being part of that chapter in your life. You deserve so much better. Claire smiled, a genuine, warm smile, the kind that came from having let go of the past and embraced the future. We all make mistakes, Melissa, but you're here now and that's what matters. I hope you're happy. I really do. As Melissa left the boutique, Claire stood there for a moment, reflecting on everything that had brought her here. She had fought through the pain, the betrayal, and the heartbreak, and now, standing on the other side of it, she could see just how far she had come. The woman who had once been devastated was now the woman who inspired others, who showed them how to rise above their circumstances and create a life of their own. Her success was not just in the boutique she had built, but in the way she had reclaimed her power. She had learned that sometimes the greatest strength came from forgiving, from releasing the past and focusing on the future. Claire was no longer defined by the woman who had been hurt, but by the woman who had overcome. And that, she knew, was the true victory. Conclusion and lesson: sweet revenge, success. Claire stood at the helm of her success, a force to be reckoned with. The journey had been long, often grueling, but it had all led to this moment, the culmination of years of hard work, determination, and a refusal to let her past define her. Her boutique chain had grown beyond her wildest expectations, each new location opening its doors to loyal customers and offering a glimpse into the empire she had built from the ground up. Recognition for her achievements came in waves, but none of it felt as satisfying as the knowledge that she had done it on her own terms. There was no one else to thank for her success, no one else to credit but herself. Claire had fought for everything she had: her business, her independence, and her dignity. She had never once allowed Mark's betrayal or anyone else's doubts to hold her back. She had taken control of her life, and in doing so had created a legacy that was all her own. It wasn't just about the money or the accolades. It was about proving to herself that she was stronger than anything life could throw at her. As she stood in her flagship store, overseeing the bustling scene of customers and employees working seamlessly together, Claire's thoughts drifted back to Mark, to his last text message. At the time, his words had stung, cutting deep into a place she hadn't even known was vulnerable. But now, as she thought of those words, they no longer held the power they once did. Mark had thought he could break her with his cruelty, his dismissiveness, his calculated escape. But instead, his message had become a symbol of her strength, a testament to the woman she had become. His attempts to diminish her had only fueled her fire, and now, those words felt like nothing more than a distant echo of a life she had long left behind. Claire smiled softly to herself, the kind of smile that came from knowing she had not only protected her assets and her business, but that she had built something far more valuable, her freedom. She had proven that the best revenge wasn't about getting even, wasn't about vindictive actions or petty gestures. The best revenge was living well, succeeding on her own terms, and showing the world and herself that no one could ever break her. As she watched her employees and customers, Claire knew she had done more than just survive. She had thrived. And in the end, that was the most powerful victory of all.